WP-Get Web Dev Tutorials for all user levels. Alright guys, a quick one today. It's just showing how to use grid layouts with Elementor containers. I've seen quite a few posts where people have said Elementor doesn't support grid. Completely untrue. There is no UI for it as of yet. I'm not sure how that implemented. It's quite a complex thing, grid, where there's a lot of options, a lot of alternatives that you can use. But Elementor, just like every other page builder, produces standard web code. So that's standard HTML, standard CSS, and standard JavaScript. So when someone says you can't do CSS grids in Elementor, what they mean is they don't understand the CSS on how to do it. I'm going to show you quickly here what I mean by that. So what I've done is a quick example here where I've got a standard container as my outer container, and I've just dragged that to the screen, and on the layout it's a standard box. I haven't done anything with the settings on here except for put a bit of batting on the top and the bottom so we can see this a little bit better on the screen. And that's all I've done with my outer container. I've then added a container inside there, so the next level down, and make it full width. Quick tip with Elementor containers, apart from your outside containers where for sections, pretty much every container you use, I would imagine, will be full width, because that will go to the full width of its parent, and it doesn't produce any additional DOM elements underneath it for sizing of content. So I would say pretty much 99.9% of the containers that you're going to add, you should be setting them to full width. All right. So in our grid, I'm going to come back to some CSS in here. Inside that, all I've done is I've added some items. And again, it's a container that's full width, nothing set on it. The only thing I've done is put a border on these so we can see the border around where they are. And on the first two, I think I've just added a class. This one's called GridSpan 1. Next one's called GridSpan 2. And that's just so I can show you some of the grid stuff working. And then all I've done is just duplicate all of these out. I think these ones don't have a class. They don't. So I've just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 standard Elementor full width containers with nothing else set on them. What you put inside those is up to you, how you set them up. You can use flex on those containers to align and lay out content within those containers. But this is where Elementor doesn't have any options here to turn this into a grid. It's basically got standard flexbox properties for your justifying of your items, etc. Under your advanced, you've got some we've got here align self, the order, the size, which is actually your flex grow and flex shrink, and this is all flexbox stuff, so we don't have grid here. So how do we do a grid? Very simple. In this case, I'm just going to show you on the actual container. We go into our custom CSS. I'm using Elementor Pro, so I can use this custom CSS here and use the selector keyword, which targets that element. All I do, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, turn on my grid display by setting my display to grid. I didn't have to do this because the Elementor UI gap also applies here, but we can make that what we want. I could change that to say 10, and you can see that change. Actually, we can't see it change in here, but when we publish the page, we'll see the change. And I've set my grid template columns to repeat 4 items of 1 fraction each. So I'm going to get 4 across the that container, all right, with my grid gap. What's this here? That's a bit strange. In the editor, this doesn't apply, but in the front end it does. If you wanted to, you can also use your gap here, and you can change it there. That still applies. You can do that if you want to, and not put on your custom CSS here, and that'll still work. So basically what we've done is turn this into a grid layout. So I've got 7 items, repeating of 4, so 4 columns. I haven't specified rows, so it's going to automatically calculate the rows that it needs, and each column is one fraction of the parent container. All right. Now, I mentioned on these first 2, I've given them a class. So this one's called Grid Span 1, that one's called Grid Span 2. So if I uncomment my grid span 1 and I tell it my grid column is a span of 2, my first, drop that down so I can see all of it. So now my first item is now spanning 2 columns, right? And the rest just wraps around. Everything's lined up perfectly. So we've got a grid layout. This is really, really hard to do with Flexbox because you've got to look at what happens to fill the space. You've got to have wrapping, and then when it wraps, you've got to set maximum width so it doesn't take up too much space, and it never completely fits a proper grid. This is the way you would do it if you want a proper grid layout. And on my span 2, I've just told that to be a grid column span of 2 and a row span of 2. All right, so now my second item is now 2 columns wide and 2 rows high. Zoom out a little bit so I can see that. So just by changing those simple properties there, giving a class name to the first and the second item, I've now got my first item as being 2 columns wide, my second item as being 2 columns wide and 2 rows high. Right, so it's really, really effective. Now, I typically wouldn't put my CSS here. That's another topic. I tend to put mine in a code manager and keep it all in the same place and use some semantic naming to keep everything consistent. But for the purposes of demonstration, this shows you that you can actually get a grid layout using Elementor containers, and it works perfectly. So hopefully this is something that you'll find useful, and I'd love to see it in your designs. I will also put a link into a really, really good article on YouTube, this one here. This guy Kevin Powell, he's just very, very good. Loves his CSS, very good at explaining it. This tutorial is the best I've seen explaining how grids work. So I'll put a link to that, and you can do anything that you can see in this tutorial. You can do in Elementor by simply setting your display to grid on a container and then using the standard grid CSS properties after that. So hopefully this is something that you will use. If you like this, please subscribe. Please hit the like button. Thank you.